The air was split by the shrill pitch of her voice. "Officer! He's trespassing! He's violating our community rules!"
Officer, he went that way.
HOA. Karen stood at the curb, arms flailing as if she were directing traffic, her words tumbling over each other in a rush to condemn me. Neighbors leaned on fences and gathered on porches, their eyes drawn by the spectacle, whispers threading through the crowd like sparks in dry grass. Minutes later, the hum of engines grew louder. Squad cars rolled slowly down the street, red and blue lights painting the evening in flickering streaks of authority. Phones rose into the air, cameras recording every second as though history were about to unfold. For many, it felt like Judgment Day had come to the neighborhood, the HOA finally summoning the full weight of law to enforce its will. Karen smirked, her chin lifted high. To her, this was the ultimate proof of her power. Police cars responding to her call, officers stepping out to enforce her decree. She stood with the confidence of someone who believed victory was certain, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "You're finished," she said with relish, loud enough for the crowd to hear. But I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I stood still, calm, letting the flashing lights dance across my face. Every second the crowd grew quieter, their curiosity mounting. They looked from her gloating expression to my steady silence, wondering why I wasn't panicking, why I didn't even blink at the sight of uniforms approaching. Then I spoke, my words slow, deliberate, carrying through the hush like the crack of thunder. She called the cops to arrest me, what she didn't know. I paused, letting the suspense settle over the street, every ear straining for the answer. My eyes locked with hers, her smirk trembling at the edges. "I'm their chief." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones shook in hands as neighbors tried to capture the moment. Karen's smile faltered, her certainty unraveling in an instant. The officers paused, their eyes flicking toward me with a recognition she hadn't anticipated. And what happened next would leave everyone in disbelief. The flashing lights had barely faded when the weight of what she had done began to sink in. Calling the police wasn't just another one of her empty threats. It was the culmination of years of escalating arrogance. For Karen, the HOA wasn't about maintaining the neighborhood. It was about ruling it. And tonight, she believed she had summoned the ultimate proof of her authority, the law itself. But the truth was more dangerous than even she realized. By dragging in the police, she had crossed a line. This wasn't a petty citation about grass height or a fine for paint color. This was her attempting to weaponize the very institution meant to protect us all. She believed the sight of squad cars and uniforms would silence me, terrify my neighbors, and cement her as the unquestioned ruler of the cul-de-sac. Her arrogance hung in the air like smoke. She strutted as though she had delivered justice, pointing to me as if I were some criminal plucked from the shadows. "There!" she announced, her voice trembling with excitement. "That's the man violating our rules." Neighbors glanced between us nervously. They wanted to believe the system was fair, that the people sworn to protect them wouldn't be manipulated by one person's vendetta. But doubt crept in. If she could call the cops on me, what was to stop her from calling them on anyone? That fear spread through the crowd, unspoken but palpable. Parents clutched their children tighter. A delivery driver muttered about never parking in the neighborhood again. For years, people had whispered that Karen was dangerous, not because of her rules, but because of how she bent those rules to her will. And now, with sirens fading into silence behind her, she looked more untouchable than ever. But arrogance always carries a blind spot. She thought the badge was hers to wield, forgetting what the badge truly stood for. She didn't understand that power borrowed through intimidation is nothing compared to authority earned through service and sacrifice. The neighbors didn't know it yet, but her show of strength was about to collapse under its own weight. Because when you call on the law as a weapon, you'd better know whose hands it rests in. And tonight, Karen had summoned something she wasn't prepared to face. The cruisers were parked, the officers waiting, the neighborhood silent. She thought she had unleashed justice. In truth, she had unleashed a storm she could never control. Karen had always carried herself as if the HOA badge were a crown. To her, being president of the board wasn't a volunteer role, it was a throne, a license to rule over every driveway, every porch light, every mailbox in sight. She didn't just enforce the rules, she twisted them, bent them, and remade them to fit her appetite for control. Her reign began with the smallest of crusades. A neighbor left their trash can out overnight. Karen fired off a letter dripping with threats of fines. Another painted their shutters a shade too close to red. Karen claimed it clashed with community standards and demanded they repaint at their own expense. Families who once dreamed of peace in their new homes soon learned that life under Karen meant constant surveillance, where every choice could be turned into an offense. Her contradictions were impossible to ignore. She claimed to protect property values while harassing veterans over flags, parents over playsets, and retirees over lawn ornaments. She draped herself in the language of safety and order, yet every action created division, anxiety, and resentment. For Karen, it was never about safety. It was about watching people flinch when she spoke, about seeing her power reflected in their fear. Neighbors tried to push back. One family argued that their grill on the porch wasn't a violation. Karen slapped them with escalating fines until they gave up. Another couple fought her decision about their garden fence, only to be dragged through endless board meetings where Karen wielded procedure like a weapon. Most eventually surrendered, not because she was right, but because fighting her drained too much time, money, and energy. She thrived on exhaustion, on being the last one standing after everyone else walked away. Her obsession with control grew bolder. She filed noise complaints against children playing basketball in their own driveways. She threatened families with liens over Christmas lights she deemed too bright. She even tried to ban neighborhood block parties, calling them public safety hazards. Each move tightened her grip, feeding the illusion that she was untouchable. And yet, she always wanted more. The HOA gave her a title, but she craved authority that stretched beyond the bylaws. She wanted to command not just neighbors, but institutions, to summon the weight of law whenever her own word wasn't enough. She spoke often of her connections, hinting that police were just a phone call away, as if they existed to serve her agenda. It was intimidation wrapped in false confidence, and for too long it worked. Which is why, on that night, she believed calling the police would be her crowning moment. To her, it was the ultimate flex, squad cars pulling in at her command, lights flashing as proof of her dominance. She thought she could point her finger and have the law itself carry out her will. But arrogance is always blind. She had spent so long playing the queen of a cul-de-sac that she forgot what real authority looks like. She thought the badge was hers to wield, her personal weapon to silence anyone who stood in her way. What she didn't know was that the badge she thought belonged to her would soon expose just how powerless she really was. She thought the badge was on her side, but it was about to turn against her. I wasn't born into power, and I never needed a spotlight to define me. My story was shaped by years of service, sacrifice, and a belief that justice should be a shield for the vulnerable, not a weapon for the arrogant. Long before Karen ever picked up a clipboard, I had already carried a badge, not as a symbol of dominance, but as a commitment to something greater than myself. I grew up watching my parents work jobs that left their hands cracked and their backs sore. They were immigrants who believed in building rather than tearing down, who taught me that dignity was worth more than wealth. From them, I inherited not only a work ethic but a sense of responsibility to stand firm when others were afraid and to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That calling led me into law enforcement. The early years weren't easy. Long nights on patrol, holidays spent away from my family, hours writing reports while my children grew older without me at home. But through those years, I learned patience, discernment, and calm. I saw how fear could twist people, how arrogance could destroy communities, and how true authority came not from barking orders, but from listening, from showing restraint, from standing firm in silence until the truth revealed itself. Service demanded sacrifice. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, family milestones. My wife carried the weight of raising our children while I carried the weight of a city's safety. Yet every missed moment was balanced by a conviction that I was leaving my community stronger than I found it. Step by step, case by case, I rose through the ranks, not because I chased power, but because I chased integrity. Eventually, the badge I wore bore a new title: Chief. As chief, my responsibility wasn't just to enforce laws, it was to embody them. I trained my officers to see themselves not as enforcers of fear, but as guardians of dignity. I reminded them daily that their authority wasn't theirs to exploit. It was a trust given by the people they served. That philosophy became my compass, and it's why Karen's theatrics never rattled me. To her, the police were a hammer she could swing at will. To me, the police were a shield, one I had sworn to hold steady even against people like her. That's why, as the flashing lights cut through the night and the squad cars rolled into the neighborhood, I felt no fear. I knew those men and women stepping out of their cruisers. I had trained them, promoted them, guided them through storms far larger than a suburban squabble. Karen believed she had summoned a weapon. What she had really summoned were my officers. So when the flashing lights hit the street and neighbors held their breath, I stayed calm, because I knew exactly what was coming. The squad cars idled at the curb, red and blue lights pulsing across the quiet street. Officers stepped out, scanning the scene with practiced calm. Before they could even speak, Karen rushed forward, waving her arms as though directing her own personal army. "There he is!" she shouted, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "That man is trespassing, violating HOA codes, and resisting community authority. Arrest him immediately." Her voice carried down the block, each word sharpened to cut through the silence. Neighbors gasped, some clutching their children closer, others whispering nervously. Phones tilted higher, recording every second. To them, this was the moment the HOA had been building toward for years, Karen wielding police power like a sword. I stood motionless, arms relaxed, gaze steady. The officers looked from her to me, unsure whether to act or let the tirade run its course. Karen, emboldened by their hesitation, doubled down. "You have to take him away right now. He's a danger to this neighborhood. He thinks he's above the rules, and if you don't do your job, everything here will fall apart." The desperation in her words was masked by bravado, but it bled through the cracks. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. They weren't sure if they wanted to see me in handcuffs or to see her finally silenced. The air hung heavy with uncertainty, the tension thick enough to choke. I let her words pile up like bricks on her own shoulders. Every accusation, every exaggerated claim, every smug glance at the cameras only deepened the pit she was digging. I met her eyes briefly, not with anger, but with a calm so steady it unsettled her. She faltered for a moment, then turned back to the officers, barking, "Well, what are you waiting for? Do your duty!" The silence stretched. The crowd leaned in, anticipation buzzing like electricity in the air. Karen's face flushed as she realized her victory wasn't arriving as swiftly as she imagined. She threw her arms wide, a final performance meant to seal her dominance. "If you let him stand here one more second, you're betraying this community." Her words rang out, but instead of echoing triumph, they landed like a challenge the officers couldn't ignore. Slowly, their gazes shifted, not toward me, but back to her. And then the officers turned, not to me, but to her. The moment their eyes shifted, the entire street seemed to exhale. Karen's triumphant stance faltered, her arms slowly lowering as confusion rippled across her face. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "He's the criminal! Arrest him!" But the officers didn't move toward me. They looked at me with something else in their eyes, not suspicion, not hesitation, but recognition. One of them straightened, a flicker of respect breaking through his professional mask. Another nodded slightly, waiting for me to speak. Karen caught it too. Her smirk vanished. She stepped back, her certainty unraveling in real time. "What's going on here?" she stammered. "Why aren't you putting him in cuffs?" I finally broke my silence, my voice calm but cutting. "Because, Karen, you didn't just call the cops on your neighbor." I let the words hang in the heavy air, every phone recording, every neighbor leaning in. "You called my officers." Gasps swept the crowd. Some neighbors covered their mouths, others laughed in disbelief, and a few whispered frantically into their phones, already sending the twist to friends. Karen's face turned pale, then red, then pale again as the meaning sank in. One officer stepped forward, his tone steady. "Chief, how would you like us to proceed?" The word hit like thunder. "Chief." Karen stumbled as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She blinked rapidly, searching for some loophole, some shred of control to cling to. You can't be serious," she muttered. He can't be." But the truth was undeniable. Every officer there had trained under my leadership. Every badge bore the same oath I had sworn to uphold. Her imagined power collapsed the moment reality stepped forward. I looked her in the eye, unflinching. "Authority isn't yours to borrow when it suits you. It's earned, and it's exercised with dignity. Something you've never understood." My words weren't shouted, but they cut deeper than any raised voice could. The crowd broke into murmurs, some laughing outright, others applauding softly, their fear melting into relief. One teenager yelled, "Karen just called the cops on the chief," and the phrase spread instantly, a chant of disbelief and mockery. Karen's clipboard slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the pavement like fallen leaves. She scrambled to collect them, but each sheet only added to the humiliation. Neighbors filmed every second, capturing her frantic collapse. And though her defeat was plain for all to see, the real humiliation was still waiting for her. By sunrise, the story had spread faster than wildfire. What began as a neighborhood spectacle turned into a parable the entire community couldn't stop talking about. Karen had tried to summon the law like her personal weapon, only to discover she had called it on the very man who led it. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around her rules now laughed openly. The phrase, "she called the cops on the chief," became a running joke, whispered on sidewalks, shouted across yards, even printed on a meme with her stunned face frozen in shock. Another clip went viral showing the exact moment the officers addressed me as Chief, spliced with dramatic music and captions like, "The HOA's reign is over." Social media exploded. Local forums lit up with threads, each retelling the story with growing exaggeration. "HOA Karen arrests herself," one headline read. Community groups passed around video snippets until even neighboring towns knew what had happened. Meanwhile, the board meetings that once functioned as Karen's throne dissolved into chaos. Members scrambled to distance themselves, claiming they'd never supported her call. Some resigned quietly, others bickered openly, and Karen, once the unchallenged voice of authority, sat in silence, her power shattered. For me, the respect from neighbors deepened. Families approached to thank me, not because I'd embarrassed her, but because I'd done it without arrogance. Calm had defeated chaos. Dignity had defeated noise. And the neighborhood, once suffocated by fear, breathed freely again. But even as laughter echoed and memes circulated, I knew the heart of the story reached deeper than humiliation. Because the true meaning of this story isn't about cops or titles at all. It would have been easy to revel in Karen's humiliation, to let the laughter and memes define the moment. But that was never the point. Power isn't proven by who can shout the loudest or cause the most embarrassment. It is proven by who can stand calm when arrogance tries to take the stage. I reminded my neighbors that the lesson wasn't about a title or a badge. It was about dignity. Karen had tried to twist the law into her personal club, forgetting that the law exists to protect, not to intimidate. She believed control came from fear. But real authority, lasting authority, comes from knowledge, preparation, and the quiet strength to let the truth reveal itself. Every immigrant family who has faced intimidation, every parent who has had to bite their tongue when wrongly accused, every worker who has been told they don't belong, this story belongs to them too. It's a reminder that arrogance collapses when met with calm confidence, and that bullies always stumble when they try to weaponize what was meant to serve the people. The neighbors learned something important that night. Shouting doesn't make you strong. Standing tall makes you unshakable. You don't need to scream back at hate to defeat it. Sometimes you only need to let the truth surface, and it will do the work for you. And that's why, when the laughter faded and the crowd dispersed, the message that lingered was bigger than any HOA squabble. It was a truth that every person there could carry into their own lives. The strongest badge isn't pinned to a uniform. It's written in dignity. Karen thought she could silence me by summoning the police. She believed a pad of citations and a phone call to dispatch could bend the world to her will. But in her arrogance, she forgot one crucial truth. Authority isn't something you steal. It's something you earn. She called the cops to arrest me, never realizing she had called on my own officers. And in that moment, her illusion of control shattered. This story isn't just about one HOA showdown. It's about every person who's been bullied, every family who's been intimidated, every voice told to stay small. It's a reminder that dignity will always outlast arrogance, and that truth will always shine brighter than noise. So if you've ever faced down a Karen of your own, whether at work, in your neighborhood, or even in your own family, let this story be proof that justice and dignity still win. If this moment struck you, if it reminded you of the strength we all carry when we refuse to bow to petty tyranny, then join us. Like this video, share it, subscribe to this channel. Together, we can build a movement where arrogance collapses and dignity stands tall.